Hi everyone. It's been a long time since I recorded. At this point, I think it's like over a year. But this time, I think I'd like to go over a period in Jack Kirby's career. Uh, let's start with the Comic Code. In 1954, the Comic Code was enacted October of that year. It was basically a governing body that was self-censorship, and it came about because of these Senate hearings that kind of targeted juvenile delinquency on the comic industry. And in many retrospects, when you look back at it, they were really looking at the horror comics, but they were attacking the comic industry as a whole. When the Comic Code was enacted, it meant the end of comics of that era. And it meant the demise of many companies. One specifically being EC Comics, which was definitely targeted by the Senate subcommittee during those hearings. They were decimated after the code. The only thing that really survived after that was Mad Magazine survived. So, but it did mean a lot of other smaller companies started going belly up as well. And one of them was Mainline Comics. Mainline Comics was the company that was, or comic creating company that was partnered with Joe Simon and Jack Kirby during the 1950s. They basically contracted out to other publishers. They created content. That content was then given to other publishers to publish. Around 1955, they were basically finishing up. They were bringing some other project that they were working on to other publishers for them to release on their own. Joe Simon went to advertising, and Jack Kirby started doing contract work. We did see in 1955 also the last issue of Fighting American being released. That was probably one of the last few mainline comics, and Win a Prize #1 was one of the last Joe Simon, Jack Kirby comics produced in the 1955. Now, what did Jack Kirby do after he left Mainline? He started doing contract work. That meant he was working for a bunch of other publishers. He was working over at Charlton doing some books over there, and that included that Win a Prize #1 and some other titles. But he also found his way back to DC Comics, which was known as National Comics during that time period. And at National Comics, Jack Kirby had brought some ideas with him. One of those was Challenge of the Unknown. So Jack Kirby started working on some of the mystery titles at DC, and then was working on Challenges of the Unknown with Dave Wood, a writer at the time. And because Mainline had shrunk to such a smaller size, his wife Roz was actually doing inking assignments with him. So basically they were doing Challenge of the Unknown, and in the year 1956, in November of that year, Showcase #6 was released, which was the introduction of Challenges of the Unknown. It was dated January, February of 1957, and Showcase was a trial book. When DC wanted to test a title, but they didn't want to commit to a mag, a monthly or bi-monthly, a lot of these mags were at the time, they would do premiere and Showcase and trial it out and give it a go. So Challenges was released under Showcase #6, and would have some other releases going, and more Showcase releases as time go by. During also 1956, Kirby found his way back to Timely, which is at the time Atlas Comics. And Stan Lee was the main editor at Atlas Comics. Atlas would one day be Marvel Comics. And there he found very sporadic work. He's working on some Western titles, and also Yellow Claw, which was a Asian mystery title at the time. Some of the work that he also started doing at that time was some of the monster titles that Atlas was producing. What we would know is kind of maybe modern kaiju stories nowadays. as he kept doing that in 1957, he premiered his mystery title in House of Secrets #3, in a storyline called The Three Prophecies, which actually made the cover of that issue. During this time at DC National Comics, Jack Kirby was working under the editor Jack Schiff, and Jack Schiff was liked Jack Kirby's work and gave him assignments, but ultimately his relationship with Jack Schiff would be his undoing at National. He was also working for Harvey Comics at this time as well during 1957 on titles like Black Cat Mystics and Alarming Tales. And he was doing that, releasing more issues of Showcase, working on the mystery titles, and also doing sporadic work for Atlas. And then in 1958, beginning of 1958, the company George Matthew Adams Service, I know that's a mouthful, went to Jack Schiff and wanted him to produce a science fiction comic strip for newspaper syndication. Comic strips were kind of like the holy grail for comic book creators at the time, because it meant, a larger paying gig, and and guaranteed work for the contractual period of whatever that length was. So Schiff was interested, so he went to his Challengers of the Unknown creators. So Jack pitched this idea for Sky Masters of Space Force, because science fiction and space exploration was very big by the mid 50s. So that seemed like a good plan to go with, something that was sparking national interest at the time. So by February 1958, a binding contract was signed for Sky Masters. It was kind of alleged in some of the articles I've read in researching this video that Jack Schiff was kind of holding assignments over Jack Kirby's head during this negotiation period. Jack Schiff wanted a portion of the profits from the newspaper syndication, and Jack Kirby, I think, was reluctant to do that, but he's holding these assignments over his head. Now, he was still doing other comics for other companies, like Race for the Moon 2 and 3 for Harvey Comics came out at the time. By April of 1958, cover date, released February 1958, Challengers of the Unknown #1 came out, and that was, basically they had already released about 4 issues of Showcase, and this was their own ongoing bi-monthly magazine that he was working with. Again, at the initial time, his wife was inking and its other inker was working on it. Wally Wood would come in, I think, because of the starting of the relationship on the negotiations of Sky Master. So he was working for National, but also as he was doing Challenge of Unknown, he got an assignment to do an ongoing Green Arrow series as well. So in May of 1958, he started his Green Arrow stories in Adventure Comics. And that storyline, or stories, they didn't have really storylines back in the 50s, that ran between Adventure Comics and World's Finest Comics, both as backup features from the main. I believe Adventure Comics was a Superboy book at the time, and World's Finest was a Batman, Superman team-up book at the time. Bill Finger got a lot of the writing credit, but of course Jack Kirby always brings a lot of his conceptual ideas with him. But they both worked together on redoing or retelling Green Arrow's origin during this run as well. Now, by May 1958, contracts were signed for Sky Masters. So that was ready to go. Everyone had signed, and that was going to go forward. Now, June 1958, Atlas top artist Joe Manini passes away, and Stan Lee reaches out to Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko to start filling the void for this missing artist, to see that they can start filling out their the book schedule, and so Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko starts doing a lot more titles. By August of 1958, Wally Wood formally takes over the inking chores on Challenges of the Unknown. Also, around this time, Jack Schiff starts demanding a bigger commission from Sky Master. It's moving forward, and Jack Schiff doesn't think that he's getting what he's supposed to be getting based on the contract that they signed, and he starts making demands. September 1958, the first Sky Master daily is released to the public. This was a really what was considered hard science fiction daily comic strip, released every day in syndication across, and the artwork was really high level for comic strip of that time. I mean, they did have other strips at that time that were very well done as well, like Prince Valiant, but again, for hard science fiction, this was really a high caliber daily strip. Now, it's released. Unfortunately, by December of 1958, Jack Schiff files a legal complaint against Jack Kirby. He says he deserves a percentage of the profits. Jack Kirby believes he's just entitled to a gratuity for a finder's fee, and Jack Kirby countersues. So we go into 1959. Although there's a legal battle going on for Sky Masters, it was being published daily. In January of 1959, Color Sundays starts being released. And again, high caliber artwork, hard science fiction for the time. These were really gorgeous Sunday strips, and you can see this example right here. It was just, you had a combination of Jack Kirby's creativity and design work and Wally Wood's inking, which is just incredible. So these were high quality, although they're still facing this legal battle with Jack Schiff. September, Jack took assignments from Archie Comics to produce Double Life of Private Strong, which was an action hero known as the Shield, but they couldn't use the Shield title in the book. You might have seen this cover before. It's got this really interesting movie strip border on the side. It's kind of interesting how that was done, and the look that Jack Kirby created for it. He also did The Adventures of the Fly, which boy who transforms into this hero, kind of the concept that Jack Kirby brought over for his first idea for Spider-Man that didn't quite pan out over there. By April 1959, Challenge of the Unknown, issue number 8, would be Jack Kirby's last work over at National Comics. And that would be his last work for over a decade. He would not work over at National until Jack Schiff retired, I believe in 1970 or 69. And we all know that after that, Jack Kirby went over there and created all those characters for DC, the Fourth World characters, the Demon, and other characters that are still being utilized today over at DC. In September of 1959, Wally Wood would leave Sky Master Strip, and the inking chores would be taken over by Dick Ayers. Now, Dick Ayers was also a Marvel artist that worked on a lot of stuff with Jack Kirby during that time period as well, so it was a nice fit to bring him over to work on Sky Masters. October 1959, you would see the first hearings in the Sky Master case. They were taking depositions on both parties' side, and then by December of 1959, Kirby would lose and be ordered to pay the 4% profits of the proceeds and the legal fees and the court costs. This was devastating, because already in an industry that had shrunken and work was hard to get, he was now out of National, and now owed this money. So he definitely was ready to really increase his workload over at Atlas. And in 59, his workload increased by so much, he was creating these classic Marvel monsters such as Gratu, Monstro, Diablo, Taboo, Bombay, Groot, what was the Hulk, and later he would also create one of the most famous Marvel monsters, Fin Fang Foom. Again, an incredible amount of production from Jack Kirby during this time period. He had bills to pay. And Jack Kirby, in the 1960s, Jack Kirby would increase that work again, working on the monster comics, some romance comics, and revival of many of the Western titles. Titles like Love Romance, Kid Colt, Rawhide Kid, Strange Tales, Tales to Astonish, Tales to Suspense, and Two Gun Kid. Some of these titles would also be transferred to hero titles later on, but right now they were monster titles and suspense titles. Jack Kirby would continue to work on the Sky Master strip. I believe this was a contract obligation that he had to continue, even though at this point I don't know if he was making a profit or not. The stuff that I've read doesn't really say after the judgment if it was profitable or not, but I do know that the strip would end by 1960. And then that was, the end of the strip. So I would imagine if it was beneficial for all parties, it might have continued. But again, I don't think Jack Kirby wanted to work with Jack Schiff and vice versa. Now, by 1961, Kirby was continuing working with Atlas, but he also did some issues of Classic Illustrated. Classic Illustrated was taking literature classics and turning them into comic versions of those stories. But he found that work over at Classic Illustrated was a bit tough because they were very, very demanding of research. They wanted things to be accurate, so they were always looking for revisions and going back to Jack Kirby to make changes to meet those revisions. And he found it very hard work over there because they wanted accuracy in those Classic Illustrated tales. Now, he's working for Atlas throughout 1961. His production is up there. The company is still kind of struggling. Atlas Comics still struggling over this time period. And then by August of 1961, Fantastic Four #1 is released. And this changed everything. Between Jack Kirby's concepts, his design work, Stan Lee's dialogue work, and overall selling of his product, it changed the comic industry. And it changed it in ways that other comic companies had to stand up and take notice because of the sales numbers and the way that they were creating at the time. It was a concept that they hadn't looked at before, where heroes had real problems. They had conflict with each other. They had arguments with each other. It was kind of a more adult approach to comic book writing. And again, this just changed the industry. So Jack Kirby, during his mid to late 50s, early 60s time period, went from having his own comic company producing, but because of that comic code, he had to start taking work from other companies. But this led to him working with Jack Schiff, that got that comic strip contract that ultimately led to him actually being blackballed from National, meaning that he had to pick up more work at Atlas. That led to a stronger relationship between Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, that led to Fantastic Four #1, which leads to the creation of the Marvel Universe. So you have to ask, what if Jack Schiff never demanded the extra money? And Jack Kirby just kept working on Sky Masters of Space Force for as long as he could. Now, the comic strip, weekly, daily, and Sunday comic strip pays a lot more, or paid a lot more during that time period than doing comic work. He could have sustained his family on that, just doing that strip, probably. So if he hadn't had this financial clash with Jack Schiff, maybe he would have just stayed and done that. He wouldn't have had to pick up extra work for Atlas. He might have even given up comics altogether. Was the code the seed or genesis of the Marvel Universe? I know this video is kind of went a little long, and I hope I got most of my facts, or all my facts, right. If you find that I haven't got anything right, please make a comment below and correct me. I would love to hear if you have any more information. And also, if you like this content, like, subscribe, share, and maybe comment on what you'd like to see me do next for a video. Would you like me to go into deeper on any of these books that I've touched on in this video? Maybe talk more about the challenges of the unknown, maybe talk about the Marvel Monster books, maybe talk about Sky Masters of the Space Force, delve into that even deeper. Let me know what you'd like to see in an upcoming video, and hopefully I would do that sooner than later. Again, thank you for watching. I appreciate your attention and your time.